Okay. So we are continuing with chapter 20 of the Vedanta Treatise, the Supreme Reality. Are there any questions on anything before we pick up with where we left off? Okay, as always, the chat box is there, so feel free to jump on the chat box or the microphone also. Feel free to interrupt.
Hi, Glenn, this is Nancy. I have a question about the path of action.
Yeah, sure.
So the VD says that there are three ways in which energy gets drained in the path of action, which could be worrying about the past, anxiety about the future, and the third is excitement or fever of doing, which is something that I deal with a lot. So I'm wondering, like, if you could give me some tips on how to practically address that issue, like how do you keep your mind focused on the action itself and not get caught up in that whole action of doing and that idea that it's that you are doing the action. And I work in New York City. I think that the environment does also have some impact on that as well, and it keeps me I think at some level it does also increase my desires because I'm doing and I don't want to keep doing more and more. So how can how do I deal with that?
So this idea of the fever of doing, so as you said, there's three ways that energy is dissipated. So this is talking about both psychological and physical energy. There's three ways that it gets dissipated. The mind goes rushing off into the future. I want to achieve that, or what if I don't achieve that? The past, this has happened. And the third way is, as he talks about it, is the fever of doing. So you can think of this as the excitement that you have over doing the action itself. There's a sense in which you lose yourself in the action. And you alluded to this idea of being the doer. So doership is a part of it. I'm the one doing it. But another aspect is just the excitement of the action itself, and that can come from different places. Think of a young child opening birthday gifts. There's a fever of excitement. They're not thinking about the past. They're not thinking about the future. They're very much in the present, but you see that the attention is boiling over. There's no objectivity at all. They're completely enraptured by the experience of opening the gift. So the question to ask when we're looking to address this is, what is this fever of doing and where does it come from? Or to think of it perhaps another way is, what am I getting out of it? What is the ego getting out of it? So this is the first aspect of addressing it. Once you've got a broad understanding of what this fever of doing is, the reason that we are in that state is because the ego is getting something out of the action. So start to think about it in those terms, and then you can question that. What am I doing? So be aware of the action itself. You can think of it both in terms of the actual physical thing you are doing, and you can think of it more in terms of a broader picture. What am I doing? I'm ordering tablecloths and napkins. What am I doing? I'm organizing an event. Okay, they're both the same answer. Those are both correct answers to the same question. Why am I doing it? So this is a key aspect. Often the reason that we get into that fever of doing is that we lose sight of the larger picture. Why am I doing it? Answer the question with regards to the ego. What's the ego getting out of it? Another approach then, once you've figured out what the ego is getting out of it, is to answer the question with respect to a higher purpose. What am I doing? Ordering napkins and tablecloths. What am I doing? I'm helping to organize an event. What's the ego getting out of it? I'm going to be seen as the busy one. I'm going to be seen as highly efficient. I'm the one who's going to be very helpful. So you think about what the ego is getting out of it. Then start to ask the question of, beyond the ego, what am I doing this for? The moment you can connect to a goal that lies outside the ego, that tendency to get involved starts to diminish. So what we're talking about here with this fever of doing is the sense of being involved in it. The way to address involvement is to develop objectivity. Now, as we always talk about, over time, the development of objectivity means the development of the intellect. So it's that continuous ongoing process of self-reflection, of questioning, etc. But as you point out, that's not necessarily going to help me today. And so what you need to do is to reconnect back to your ideal. What am I doing this for? Who's the beneficiary? Outside my ego. If people don't know that I'm the organizer, if I'm a silent, unnamed helper, who's being helped and how? So think of it in terms of the surrendering to the ideal. So in chapter 3, verse 30 of the Bhagavad Gita, he gives the blueprint of the path of action. So the body acts according to its obligation. The mind surrenders to the ideal. Because in any action, you're always going to find something that, or aspects of it that you don't like. But you say, it doesn't matter, I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this to serve this group or this wider community. There's that element of surrender. It's not about me. So reconnect back to the wider group that you are serving. If you don't have a wider group that you are serving with your action, great. This becomes your job now. Your job is to reconnect, is to start to develop an ideal surrounding the activity. And for most activities that we're engaged in, especially stuff that we're doing on a regular basis, we can find that. It doesn't mean the activity has to change, but just the lens through which we view it. So that's the first element of an ideal. Second aspect of an ideal is the self-development part of it. So an ideal we often think of as having two aspects. One is serving a wider community. The second is your own spiritual maturity, your own growth. So what are my growth edges? What are my growth goals? Who do I want to be? What does it look like when I'm more spiritually mature? And again, if you don't have a clear and convincing answer to that question, great, again, that's your job. Establish the growth goals that you have, both within the field of activity that you're working and also more wide than that. So this is what you're looking to do. While you're in the activity, what am I doing and why am I doing it? Because it serves this greater good and it promotes my growth in these ways. So that's one aspect, is that self-reflection to reconnect back to your higher ideals. And this is how we develop objectivity, which is to circumvent the mind's demands by reconnecting with ideals. The other aspect that I touched on, when you look at what is the ego getting out of it, once you've established some of the things that the ego does get out of it, that's when you can address it with knowledge. So if you say, for example, I read, what the ego is getting out of it is the thought that I'm a really good person. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that thought. In fact, that's a thought that we should have. But the problem is, as you identified, there's an involvement in it. So you can address that with knowledge. And any piece of knowledge that works for you, understanding that my action is a drop in the ocean. As you pointed out, there's an environment with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of streams of causation. Change is occurring by people every day, all across the globe. How big is my action? I'm organizing an event. I'm getting on my computer and getting other people to deliver things. I didn't make the napkins and tablecloths. I'm not driving the truck. I'm not delivering the petrol. What am I doing really? So if you put that into a broader perspective, then that sense that I'm so great, I'm so productive, I'm so busy, starts to diminish. So again, it's a course correction. So you've already recognized what the problem is, and this is just correcting it by addressing the ego's demands with a reasonable knowledge. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts or clarifications?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question about the environment. Like, uh, uh, does the environment that you work in also play a big role in that? Like, if you're working in a space where there's a lot of people who are very rudisic, active, and also there's this idea of busyness, and everyone's doing it, and you're kind of in it as well. So how do you, I guess, like, shield yourself from that, or how is it that the environment impacts you, or is that a minimalistic impact, and is it all just in your own mind? Like, I'm just curious about that.
The environment will impact you to the extent that you are influenceable. You can imagine someone, okay, think of it from this way. Let's say you're an adult. Let's say that there is a project in which 12-year-old students are creating something. They're organizing something. They are caught up in it from their 12-year-old perspective of the world. Are you going to get dragged into that perspective? No. You're an adult. You're not going to get dragged into the 12-year-old view of things. Does the environment influence you? No, not at all. So the answer to the question, does the environment influence, depends entirely upon the individual. The degree to which you are established in your more mature perspective, the environment won't influence you at all. The environment does not create in you anything. It only stimulates what is already there. So when you look at the environment and say, well, the environment is influencing me to be more result oriented, and we use that phrase in a negative sense, what we can say is, well, no, that tendency for result orientation is already there. The environment is simply triggering it. So the environment is not a cause, the environment is a trigger. The causes are internal. The way to deal with that is very much the same as what we had touched on earlier. The reason that the environment can trigger us is because we're not objective to the environment. So how do you become objective? It's that same idea of having a clear sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it. What you can add to this is exactly what you just said, that this environment is highly rajasic. This environment is full of people who are desire-ridden, who are acting prompted by ego and to satisfy ego. The moment you recognize that as the case, even saying that, what you've done is develop some distance from it. You are standing back here, observing and analyzing the environment. And this is actually something that you can do to help you remain objective to it, making an accurate assessment of the environment that you are in and the people that you're working with. The moment you make an accurate assessment of the environment, you develop an acceptance of it. And accepting the environment means that you'll be objective to it. You can see it clearly for what it is. You're not reacting to it with your own expectations that it be different. You're not reacting to it based on your likes and dislikes, because then it's influencing you. When there is an aspect or elements of the environment that you don't like, if we find that we are influenced by those, then it means that we aren't properly objective. So reconnect back to your ideals and make that assessment. My environment is this way. Then you can ask yourself the question, what do I need to do to remain uninfluenced by my environment? Well, if the environment is constantly asking me to be involved and attached, let's just use those broad terms, then what do I need to do to remain objective? Okay, and that's where the philosophy comes in. The Swami's talked about Vedanta as being a buffet of ideas. Draw upon whichever idea, concept resonates with you, which makes sense for you to keep you established in your path. Okay, they're on the path of rajas, they're on the path of ego, desire, satisfaction. That's the world. I'm on the path of self-development. So again, you can ask yourself the question, why is the environment influencing me? Everyone is just ultra busy to the point of burnout. And I find myself succumbing to that peer pressure of also being ultra busy to the point of burnout. Why? Well, because I don't want to be seen like I'm lazy. Okay, so there's the ego aspect of it. I want to be seen as busy. I want to be seen as the same. I want to be accepted by this group. Once you've identified the ego's underlying demand, often simply identifying it is enough. You recognize, okay, now that I've said it out loud, it actually sounds a bit silly. You can take it a step further by, as I say, continuing to address that underlying demand or that underlying belief with more knowledge. If I'm not working 24/7, it means I'm lazy. It doesn't make any sense. If I'm not saying yes to every request that comes my way from colleagues and family and friends, it means I'm selfish. It doesn't make any sense. But we have these underlying thought patterns, which we can often also think of as likes and dislikes, so we have these underlying thought patterns that prompt our reactions and our behavior. So continue to go inward to identify what those are. You can also use markers throughout the day. Set reminders on your phone, for example, to take breaks. Break the day up. And don't just take breaks in terms of now I'm going to scroll through my Instagram. Let the break be something more aligned to your higher purpose. At this time of the day, you might do a short 5-minute gratitude practice. At this time of the day, you might do a short breathing practice. It might be a reconnection back to your ideals, whatever. But the point is, break that flow of attention. If you find yourself beginning to get involved by being in the action for a period of time. If you've been to the academy, all throughout the day is punctuated with invocations and chants. The first thing in the morning, after the yoga, before the meals, before the classes. Why? Just to act as a reminder of your higher purpose. So while you're sitting there mouthing some Sanskrit words that you don't know the translation of, just let the body mouth those words. What am I here for? At this Vedanta Academy, what am I here for? Why am I here? Giving up my other life to be here. So as you take these breaks, what am I here for? Not in this organization. What am I on this planet for? No, I wake up every morning into the waking state of consciousness. What am I here for? And the more you can continue to reconnect with that higher purpose, the more the lower aspects of life, you simply see them like the adult sees the child's world. So it's a consistent practice. One more aspect which addresses both of the things that you talked about is to recognize that if you are influenced by your environment, choose the right environment. Now, you can't do a lot about your workplace, okay? That's the workplace that you're in. But you can add to your day or your week satsanga. So satsanga means the company of the good. So seek out groups that have higher thoughts, a higher vibration of feeling, higher desires. Associate with that. Share, receive. That group setting can be a great way to remind you of your higher purpose and that connection with other people. So find that satsanga as well, especially if you know you're influenced by your environment. Use that in a positive way. Well, I'm going to let myself be influenced by this group of higher thinking individuals. Any other thoughts or clarifications? We'll also just open that up to the group if anyone else has any thoughts with regards to the same thing, maintaining objectivity, getting out of that fever of doing, not being influenced by your environment, anything you found that works for you. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So we are continuing with this description of the reality. So we've been going through these Sanskrit terms with a short description of each. One of the things we touched on when we were talking about this is that for a lot of these, they don't lend themselves to analysis. Small amount, you can analyze them, but they're not there for that gross intellectual discrimination. Take an example of the question that we just talked about. There's a lot of gross intellect there, analyzing the bits and pieces of the phenomenon, throwing other ideas into link, cause, and effect to establish some sort of way out of that involvement. There's a lot of gross intellect analyzing that we can do as we were talking about that. When it comes to these aspects of the reality, they don't lend themselves to that. These are more for contemplation. So contemplation simply means that we hold a particular idea or a particular thought that resonates with us in the mind. We feel it, we bathe in it. So it sort of presupposes a certain amount of prior reflection, so that when we read the description and we have a sense of it, it all makes sense to us. But having got to that point, the reflection comes to a slowdown, and instead we simply sit with the idea. And so that's the other aspect that we touched on, which is to go through all of these, understand all of them, touch on them all, and then stay with the ones that resonate with you. Maybe just one or two or a few that resonate with you, that react with your personality in a particular way. So as you are studying these, be mindful of your own inner reaction, and then go with the flow. Where you find your attention absorbed or fascinated, let it continue in that direction. So the one that we got up to from last week was Anantam, infinite. Things and beings of the world have a beginning and an end. They are all finite. They arise out of, exist in, and merge into Brahman. Brahman is the substratum upon which the worlds appear and disappear. It is beginning, endless, infinite. So we've been using a couple of analogies to get our heads around some of these ideas, some of these pointers. One has been the ocean and the waves. So that's a good one for this. All the waves have a beginning and an end. They're finite. They arise out of the ocean, exist in it, and then merge back into it. But the ocean itself doesn't have that same quality of beginning and ending. It simply is. It's the substratum. Okay, again, very easy, a very accessible analogy. So what is that distinction between the wave and the ocean? Again, you enter into that distinction. Formulate it for yourself. Again, using the language of the intellect, but at some point the language has to stop. And there is a sense in which you can sit with the conclusion. Apply that to your life as a human being. Walk out into the street. Now you're in New York City, you're in Los Angeles, you're in Auckland, and you're surrounded by other people, other beings. He says things and beings of the world. Bring the analogy forward. There's a wave. There's a wave. Look at all these waves. When you stand at the shore, perhaps elevate it a little bit, you can see wave after wave rolling in. You stand on the street, wave after wave coming towards me. And then they go past, they're gone. It's like the wave comes in, crashes, and it's gone again. Start to see all beings as individual waves connected to an unseen ocean. It's interesting. If you go down to the beach, you've got stormy weather and you want to go down and have a look at the waves because they're particularly big and crashing today. You go down, you look at the individual waves. Okay, the ocean's there in your field of vision, but you kind of miss the ocean. You know it's there, but you're not focusing on that. You're focusing on the waves. So too, we look at the individual beings. The moment we consider them as waves, bring forward the idea of the ocean. Okay, if these beings are all individual waves, what is the ocean? All the beings around me that I see right now, at some point in the future, they will all be gone. They'll all be dead, including the one thinking about this. But there'll be more beings taking their place. Where are they all arising from? And don't think of it from a physical perspective alone, although that can work. It's a consciousness. Each wave is a wave of consciousness, a subjective experience, arising out of something, existing for a while, and then merging back into something. Once you've established that sense in which there is an ocean of consciousness in which we are all, on which we are all appearing, then we sit with that sense of an ocean of consciousness. So remember that the purpose of this is not just to entertain ourselves, although it can be highly entertaining. It's to manage our attention. All of spiritual practice is attention management. Where are we placing our thoughts? So this is where the intellectual discrimination needs to come in. What's the quality of the thought that I'm entertaining? To what degree is it tamas, rajas, sattva? Toxic and inert, or desire-ridden, prompted by ego, or inherently healthy and moving towards spiritual maturity. We think of it like food. The food that I'm about to eat, is it leftover food that's been in the refrigerator for a week and a half? That too full of, I don't know, trans fats and so forth. It's toxic, it's unhealthy. Or is it just tasty to satisfy my taste buds? Or is it health promoting? Much easier when it comes to food. Same sort of analysis for our thoughts. What's the quality of this thought? Junk thought? Toxic thought? Healthy thought? So here's a buffet of thoughts in front of us. We can pick the ones that suit our nature. The next is knowledge, jnanam. Brahman is absolute, pure knowledge, the knowing principle with which everything becomes known. People have the knowledge of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Also the knowledge of joy and sorrow, of thought and idea. These are all conditioned knowledge. Knowledge defined by perception, emotion, and thought. Whereas Brahman is knowledge undefined, unconditioned. None can possess knowledge of Brahman. It is knowledge per se, unrelated to anything. So it's the difference between this objective knowledge and subjective knowledge. So it's a little bit confusing because we used the word objectivity earlier on to mean something. Here we've got a different meaning to it. All the knowledge that we have has two elements to it, a subject and an object. So he's talking about knowledge of perception, emotion, and thought. So there's the perceiver, who has knowledge of perception, the feeler, who has knowledge of emotion, the thinker, who has knowledge of thought. There's an object to which you are attached, with which you are connected, or as he puts it here, relating. I'm relating to the thought of something. Even when you're not aware that you're doing it, you are still relating to it. A thought that you're completely involved in. Okay, so we had a question earlier on about being involved in our work. I've got to get it done. I've got to get it done. I've got to do more. I've got to do more. At the time, you may not be aware that you are relating to that thought. You look back on it later. You're sitting at home at the end of the day, and you realize that you were relating to that thought. So this is all of these knowledges, perception, emotion, and thought, they're defined. They have a particular boundary. They're different from other thoughts. How is it that I come to know anything? And again, this is a contemplative idea. Simply observe yourself. Okay, I'm hearing the rain and the wind outside. I'm feeling the warm temperature on my body. I'm feeling grateful that I have this opportunity to study, and I'm thinking about the ideas here. This is all knowledge that is coming to me. I'm knowing it. I'm aware of it. How am I capable of being aware of anything? Not the mechanism of, the light enters my eyeball and then that goes into the optic nerve and that cascades through the brain centers. It's part of it. But why does that become your subjective experience? Why is it like something to stand in the rain and like something different to stand in the sun? And to whom? How am I capable of having an experience at all? What's the source of experience? Because my experiences are changing, moment to moment to moment. The object that I'm relating to, the world, is always shifting. But what's constant is that I'm always knowing it, whether it's this waking world, whether it's the dream world, or even if it's the deep sleep world. I'm knowing it. How? What's the knowing principle? Which is never an object of knowledge, but which permits me to have objects of knowledge. That is that reality, jnanam, knowledge. This can be as I say, if this particular idea is one that is appealing, you can use this. You are on a train and it's noisy and clattering and you just had enough noise for the day. You're finding that that noise is itself annoying, irritating. What enables me to hear it? What's the mechanism by which I can hear that noise at all? What enables me to relate to it? For it to become part of my subjective experience. So it's again, it's a shifting of attention off the noise. And it's not a suppression of the noise. You're not trying to push it away from you and force your attention onto something else. In fact, quite the opposite. In order to really investigate that question, you've got to stay with the noise, the clattering and the screeching. Next is Anandam, bliss. So you can see how these three are related. The two that we've just done in this one now. Anantam, infinite. This is talking about the existence of beings. They arise from, exist in, and merge into. Second one is talking about their capacity to know, to be intelligent, to have knowledge of, to have experiences. And bliss refers to the absence of agitations, the peace that we are always looking to experience. Gross body, subtle body, causal body. Gross body exists. Subtle body of mind and intellect is made up of knowledge and experience. The causal body, made up of vasanas, is unmanifest. Waking, dream, deep sleep. He says the pleasure derived from objects and beings of the world are fleeting, ephemeral, whereas the bliss of self-realization is absolute, eternal. It is the ultimate goal of human evolution. The enlightened enjoys the uninterrupted supreme bliss. So again, we can do some analysis here. Whenever we acquire an object of desire, in that moment, there's a sense of being at rest. There's a sense of peace, or the word here is bliss. It's not talking about that fluctuation of emotion. It's talking about the sense that I have been pushing effort into the world, moving forward towards this goal. And now that I'm there, I can stop. I'm at rest. And in this moment, everything is as it should be. There's a sense of bliss there. But as he says, that feeling of bliss doesn't stay. Other desires push their way into the personality or into our minds. And we are again thrust into this cycle of action, to pursue, to acquire, to enjoy, and bliss. And again, and again, and again. So we get a sense, we get a small taste of that bliss through this process of desire, action, bliss, desire, action, bliss. But we're never satisfied with it. It never stays with us. Nobody's looking for temporary happiness. We're all searching for a sense of permanent bliss. What he says is that the attempt to get that through the world is ultimately going to be futile, and that we should be getting to the source of bliss itself. When you are in that state of bliss, when you are happy, when you are peaceful, where is that peace? Well, it's not outside you. It's in here. That's where it's found. That's its native home. It's not that I've brought peace from outside me and brought it in. I've contacted an object, and then all the other stuff has quietened down and the bliss remains. So the bliss is that natural state of your own mind. It gets disturbed by desire and agitation and expectation and attachment. We act to get rid of those and get back to, the mind is back calm again. So we can have that state of uninterrupted bliss because it is the natural state of the mind. He says the enlightened enjoys uninterrupted supreme bliss. So that state of bliss doesn't mean an emotionless state. It doesn't mean that the mind isn't going through its natural fluctuations of joy and sorrow. But what it means is that there is a higher level of bliss that remains uninterrupted. So what's the analogy we always use when we're talking about this idea? Where do you go through joy and sorrow, fear and anxiety, heartbreak and loss, and yet have an uninterrupted sense of bliss? When you are watching a movie. When you watch the movie, your emotions go through their natural fluctuations according to your identification with the hero and the heroine, and the challenges and the triumphs. But at the same time, you know you're watching a movie. So while you're terrified when you're watching a horror film, there's another part of you that is not actually afraid. If you were genuinely afraid, you'd run out of the theatre. You stay sitting there. When you're heartbroken because of that scene in Titanic or Romeo and Juliet, you're not trying to make the heartbreak go away. You're fine with it. You sit with it. You're still at rest. You're at peace. So for the enlightened one, the natural changes and fluctuations of the body, mind, and intellect are like the movie. They sit back and watch from the perspective of the self. And from that perspective, knowing it's all just matter moving around, waves coming and going, they are in that state of bliss. Okay, any queries or questions before I move on to the next one? Okay, the next is Turiyam, fourth. Refers to the state of self-realization, the state of pure consciousness beyond the waking, dream, and deep sleep. These three states are conditioned by the gross, subtle, and causal bodies, respectively. When one detaches oneself from the three bodies, rises above their conditioning, one merges with the pure consciousness, which is the fourth state of Turiyam. So we went and had a look at Anantam, infinite, knowledge, and bliss, referring to the gross, subtle, and causal bodies. Gross body is the fleshy thing you see in the mirror. Subtle body refers to the mind and intellect, your feelings and your thoughts. Causal body refers to vasanas, the dormant, unmanifest tendencies that becomes your personality. When the pure consciousness is conditioned by the causal body alone, you're in the state of deep sleep. There's no manifestation, there's no expression of your personality. Whoever you are right now is not there. When the consciousness is conditioned by the subtle body, just thoughts and desires, you're in the dream state of consciousness. And when it's conditioned by the gross body, you're in the waking state of consciousness. So these are the three states that our existence goes through. And when we're in one state, we ignore the other two. Either from the perspective that we don't have access to it. So for example, in deep sleep, you don't have access to the other two states. You can't consciously ignore them. They're just not there for you. When you're in the state of dreaming, the waking state is not available to you. And even when we're in the waking state, we ignore the other two by saying, well, this is the real one. The other two were just not really there. They're illusory. They're false. When we have these three states of consciousness, as you begin to analyze, we can begin to ask what lies beyond them. If I'm moving through these three states, what's moving? What's becoming the waking state? What's becoming the dream state? What's becoming the deep sleep state? Again, that idea takes us towards that fourth state of consciousness. Achintya, inconceivable. Brahman is pure consciousness. It is the supreme self enlivening the senses to perceive objects, mind to feel emotions, and intellect to conceive thoughts. It is the subject, not the object of experience. Your body, mind, and intellect cannot reach Brahman. So the intellect is the subtlest aspect of the personality. It can understand and encompass and grasp physical experiences, perceptions, emotions. It can entertain and analyze thoughts. But there's something that it cannot grasp. It's the consciousness that gives rise to thoughts, that gives rise to the intellect as we experience it. If you like, it's the electricity that runs through the bulb. Now, the light that comes from it can't illuminate the electricity that creates it. So to the intellect is conditioned consciousness. It can't bend back, if you like, and grasp the pure consciousness that creates it. He gives an analogy here. He says the self conceiving the world through the intellect is like a viewer observing a landscape through a telescope. The viewer uses the telescope to view everything except himself. He cannot see himself with the telescope. Likewise, the self uses the intellect to conceive everything in the world except itself. Hence, the self is said to be inconceivable. So, the eye can't see itself through the telescope. The viewer cannot see themselves through the telescope. The viewer uses the telescope to see the world, and he uses that same phrase here. The self uses the intellect to view the world. So that telescope, that intellect, has a limitation. It can't see the underlying self. Hence, the self is inconceivable. Okay, so that brings us to the end of those pointers. So that's talking about the underlying reality. The next aspect, which we'll start with next week, is the manifestations. So he touched on this idea earlier on. Brahman, the reality, is both the underlying substratum and the structure on top. Ocean water is both the waves, the manifestation, and the underlying body of water. The waker's mind is the underlying substance of the dream and all the different manifestations of the dream. So it's not limited. Okay, any questions before we finish off? Okay, thanks folks, appreciate you going the distance. We are back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific for a Q&A, so for those joining, I'll see you then. And then Ishavasya Upanishad on Tuesday at 6:30. Have a great week, and I'll catch you all next time.